It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Kevin Oakes, the CEO of the Institute for Corporate Productivity, and Joe Whittinghill, the Corporate VP of Talent, Learning and Insights from Microsoft. So let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Siobhan. Appreciate that. All right, unfortunately, you only get me right at the start, but I'm Kevin Oakes, and thank you, Siobhan, for that nice introduction. And Joe will be up here in a few minutes after I go through some initial slides around culture renovation. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. If you don't know, I'll give you a little bit of background on who we are and what we do as an organization, but this is a study that we did very recently called Culture Renovation. Now, I4CP, it's kind of a mouthful. Some people say C3PO. I know it's a lot of numbers and letters. We are doing more human capital research than anybody on the planet, always with a business lens of what are organizations doing with their people practices in high-performing organizations versus low-performing organizations. And so I want to just define high performance really quickly, because I'll use that term a couple of times as I show you some of the stats. So every time I talk about high-performing organizations, I'm talking about companies that have better revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer sat over the last 5 years. We look at that over a 5-year time horizon. Has anybody gone back and looked at the book Good to Great lately? A lot of those companies aren't great anymore. A lot of those companies don't even exist anymore. So we look at this over a shorter time horizon, and we look at what are high-performing organizations doing differently than low-performing organizations, and then specifically what human capital practices are correlating to bottom-line business impact. And that's what we set out to do with this particular topic. Now, I talked to a lot of organizations and CEOs, many of whom want to change their culture. Now, most of the time when they say they want to change their culture, they call it culture transformation. And as we got into this study, we had a big debate internally. We said, you know what? Nobody ever transforms their culture. They don't completely change it. What they're really trying to do is renovate their culture. They're trying to get their culture ready for the future. And so our study involved over 7,000 organizations. We had a lot of very large companies participate in this study, almost 1,000. Probably most importantly, we had 350 companies who said that they have successfully changed their culture. Now, given the amount of companies we studied, you can probably do the math and say, wow, that's pretty low, the number of companies actually changed their culture. And that's accurate. Not a lot of companies are very successful at changing their culture overall. But we tried to profile in this study several companies that we think have done a very good job at changing their culture. And you can see some of those logos up on the screen. Now, those companies all share what we consider to be a healthy culture and different traits of a healthy culture. So we created this index of what a healthy culture looks like. Whether it's bringing out the best in your employees, nurturing innovation, being collaborative, you can read the others. That top bar is the high-performing organizations, and the bottom bar is the low-performing organizations. So you can see the difference between high and low-performing organizations. We also had some very interesting secondary measures that I wanted to show, and we use this as part of the study as well. Whether a company actively supports D&I, whether they support continuous learning and development, valuing transparency was another one that had a lot of good marks from high-performing organizations. But look at this bottom one. That's the only one where low-performing organizations outpaced high-performing. They said they had a top-down command and control organization. And I love it when all of these things correlate to market performance. You can see these low-performing organizations just aren't doing the right things with their people practices where high-performing organizations are. Now, the reason I made that little joke about good to great is because things do change very quickly. If you go back 2 decades ago and look at the most valuable companies in the world, GE was number 1, which is, I'm sorry if there's anybody from GE in the audience, but I showed this slide at GE 2 weeks ago, and I had visible groans from some people in the audience. And obviously GE has fallen on hard times, but things happen very rapidly. You can see today the most valuable companies in the world are all technology companies. But what's interesting is there's one company that has been on that list over the last couple decades, and that's Microsoft. And I love that because I think Microsoft has done a lot of the right things over the last several years, and we'll talk about that. What I also think is interesting is if I was up on this stage 10 years ago talking to all of you and predicted that Microsoft would be the most valuable company in the world 10 years from now, you would have all laughed at me. Because at that time, most people were predicting the demise of Microsoft. And there was a lot of publications out there talking about how Microsoft had lost its mojo and was a company that wasn't going in the right direction. Obviously, the company has gone in absolutely the right direction. And a lot of it coincides with when Satya Nadella became CEO. And the right pronunciation is Satya, but I'll say Satya because that's the way most people say his name. But Satya has really taken to heart this whole notion that organizational culture is critical to the overall performance of the company. And he said it in one of the first shareholder meetings that our ability to change our culture is the leading indicator of our future success. And the stock price has followed suit. And today they're the most valuable company in the world. But I suspect a lot more companies are going to be paying attention to organizational culture in the next few years. And some of that is being fueled by the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD. They are telling boards of directors that oversight of corporate culture should be one of the top governance imperatives for the board. In fact, one of the companies that we work with, Citigroup, they actually now have a culture subcommittee off of their board, just like they have a comp committee and a governance committee, et cetera. And that committee is completely focused on culture measures. How are we going to measure the impact of our culture overall? And how are we going to report that to the broader board? And this is a topic of a conversation with a lot of CHROs that we're dealing with as well. One of the reasons that culture is becoming a hotter and hotter topic is because it's so hard to change. Yet we see many times when there's a scandal inside of an organization and the market cap is cut in half, the first thing that's to blame is culture. In fact, when an acquisition doesn't work out, the first thing you hear is, oh, it was a cultural mismatch between the two companies. And changing culture can be very difficult. In fact, we found only 15% of companies were successful at changing their culture overall. So as we set out with this research study on culture renovation, we divvied it up into 3 core areas that kind of go in the renovation theme of plan, build, and maintain. And we came up with 18 action items that successful companies who changed their cultures did to make sure they could not only initiate that culture change, but then sustain it and maintain it over time. And I'm not going to go through each one of those action items. You have the handout on your chair of those action items, but I do want to highlight a few of them that I think are important. So in the plan phase, it was very, very clear, just like Satya did at Microsoft, the CEO needs to be the culture champion. We found that almost 90% of successful companies had commitment from the CEO for time and resources to see it through. Almost the same number, the CEO modeled the desired behavior change inside the organization. Now, this doesn't mean you don't need a co-creation mindset inside the organization, and we talk about that in the study as well. All of the successful CEOs and senior teams that were able to make a significant change in their culture, they got the buy-in of the employee base and got a co-creation concept mindset going with that employee base. Now, understanding what's going on with that employee base is pretty critical. One of the worst things an organization can do is for the senior team to lock themselves in a room for a couple days and decide what the culture is of the organization, because they're going to get it wrong. The best thing they can do is really survey the workforce and talk to the workforce to understand what is the culture really like right now inside the organization. However, we had a lot of cautions in the report. If you're relying on your annual employee engagement survey as the only source of info on what is going on in the culture, then you're going to miss it. It's a false proxy for what's going on in the culture. What you need to do is listen on a more regular basis. And another company we feature in the study is T-Mobile. And I think T-Mobile is a very, very interesting culture change example. If you remember back 6, 7 years ago, T-Mobile, they were at the bottom of the barrel when it came to wireless providers. They were losing customers left and right. Their customers hated them. They were just absolutely in the worst financial shape of any of the wireless providers. And then along came John Ledger, and John took over the company, and out of necessity, he said, you know what, we've got to do things differently. We've got to be a rebel in the space, and that's where they created the Uncarrier moniker. But what I thought was very interesting, John did a couple of things right off the bat. First, he said, you know what, we're going to listen very attentively to our customers and to our employees, and we're going to do what they say. And then John also, in the process of this, kind of remade himself. I sometimes show a side-by-side picture of him. When he joined T-Mobile, he had short hair, glasses, wore a suit and tie every day. Now, he looks like this. He's got long hair, he wears t-shirts and leather jackets, always with the T-Mobile logo on it. He kind of transformed himself to be, this rebel, renovated himself to be a rebel. At the same time, he was renovating the culture of the organization. But the listening part is what's really critical. When we ask companies about how frequently are you checking sentiment of the employee base, 2/3 of them said that they are gathering data and sentiment to really understand the existing culture. This is 2/3 of the successful companies. And you can see that another third are using always-on feedback technology. So forget the annual survey. There's a lot of companies that are checking sentiment on a pretty frequent basis. And they're monitoring internal social sentiment with tools like Glint, which you've heard about already at the conference quite a bit, where you can have natural language processing really help you understand the real issues that are going on inside the organization. And Microsoft does this very well. Microsoft is asking a question a day of the workforce to get a regular pulse of what's happening in the workforce. And Joe and I were talking about this and how this is working inside the organization. This really eliminates sort of the false positives. Because at any point in time, you're going to have issues bubble up. It will be issue du jour, and for 2 or 3 days, it's a hot issue. Well, if that annual engagement survey hits on the day of that hot issue, you're going to hear a lot about it. But it will probably die down after a while. And as you're checking on a frequent basis, you can monitor that and see what is sustained, what's not dying down, and what's dying down. Now, another thing we found with companies that successfully changed their culture is they were able to understand who are the influencers and energizers inside the organization that I need to enlist to really make sure that this culture change sticks. And we say in the study, and we've been big proponents of something called organizational network analysis. How many of you know what that is, ONA? Okay, only a few hands have gone up. So ONA is really understanding what is the workflow inside your organization, who is collaborating with whom inside your organization. In all of your organizations, and you can probably think of the person right now, there are go-to people that just make the place run, right? There are people, and you might be it, there are people that everyone turns to, and they are the ones that have the answers to all the questions that employees might ask. Oftentimes, those people are invisible. And when you look at a hierarchy structure, which we're all familiar with, and then buttress that with a network structure, where is the collaboration flowing? The person who's at the top of the hierarchy structure, like in this example, it's a fictitious example, but mayors is often on the outskirts of that collaboration or network cycle. The person who's in the middle, like a Mitchell, is often buried in the hierarchy structure. In fact, Mitchell is often an introvert. And if you ask senior leaders, who are the absolute go-to people in this company, they get it wrong most of the time because they just don't know. They don't know that these Mitchells exist until you do an organizational network analysis. When you do one of these analyses, you need to know who those Mitchells are if you want to change your culture, because you need Mitchell to be on board. And if Mitchell is not on board and is a detractor, you're going to have a lot of problems having that culture change stick. In fact, you also want to know, do we have whole departments, like this production unit in this example, that are only talking to each other? This happens all the time in organizations, particularly after an acquisition. You want to make sure you understand that the acquired company is getting integrated into your structure and not just being insular and only talking amongst themselves. So identifying and engaging key influencers is a big step in that plan phase. Let me go into the build phase really quickly. We all talk about engagement. I always like to joke, if you want high engagement, then just fire all the unhappy people. That usually works very well. What you need in culture change is to really understand who are the skeptics and non-believers and ferret those out early. You see it in most successful culture changes, Microsoft included. There are going to be some people that aren't willing to go along with the new way of the organization. We found that almost 40% of organizations replaced senior leaders that weren't willing or able to embrace that change. For anybody who's in L&D, you'll love this slide. We also found that high-performing organizations and companies that were very successful at changing their culture, they provided training to all leaders, senior management, mid-level managers, frontline leaders, on what behaviors they expected to see in the new culture going forward. And this was a huge dichotomy between highly successful companies and lowly successful companies that provided the budget and the time to training. They also were really good about telling stories and having symbols that symbolize the new culture that they wanted. Now, at Microsoft, and Joe will talk about this in more detail, Satya's big platform was growth mindset. And I love this story, how his wife read Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset, gave it to Satya, and he loved the concept, and that is really what they rolled out at Microsoft. But they did a smart thing. They educated all employees. I'm always amazed when I go to Redmond how every employee can talk about growth mindset in detail. But they also have posters like this in conference rooms at Microsoft that says, is this going to be a fixed mindset meeting, or is this going to be a growth mindset meeting, with examples of what each means underneath it? Great visual reminder for what's important inside the company. Booz Allen Hamilton was another company we featured in the study, and they literally wrote their values in stone, and they give out these stones to employees who exemplify a particular value. And this is very ceremonious inside the organization. I was talking to the CHRO of Booz Allen just a little while ago. She tells me she gets teary-eyed every time they do this because they make a big deal about the fact that they give out these stones to employees. So those are a couple highlights from the build phase. The maintain phase might be the most important because we find that a lot of organizations, they'll go through a culture change, and after a year or two, everything kind of reverts back to norm. Right? And they start doing things the way they used to do it. The maintain phase is critical if you want that change to stick. And we found that companies that were very good at making it stick made changes to their talent practices. Anywhere from 2.5 to 7.5x, they were able to change certain talent practices in their organization. One of those practices was on onboarding. We've seen this in many, many organizations, but you can kind of predict who's going to flame out in year 1 or year 2 and who's going to stick around in the organization. And it's all about the relationships they make. And more organizations are focusing their onboarding sessions around relationships. How can we get people connected quickly to subject matter experts inside the organization that are going to help them be successful over time? It's the same thing with culture change. We've got to make sure that new people coming in, or if we're acquiring a company, they're going to get connected quickly to the right people inside the organization. And companies that were successful did this much, much more so than the unsuccessful companies. They also realigned performance management. We've done a lot of work with companies who have gotten rid of the annual performance review. They've gotten rid of ratings inside their organization. That's not for everybody. Not every company has to go that route. But what we found successful companies did is they somehow changed their performance management practices to align with the culture that they're trying to roll out. And this is a great symbolic effort to show the workforce, hey, we're serious about this. And we're changing our performance practices to show how serious we are. They also focus on talent mobility, which is something that we've seen in many, many studies that we've done. High-performing organizations spend a lot of time on making talent mobility visible and rewarded. It's human nature for managers to hoard talent. We see it all the time. Many of you hoard talent. I've hoarded talent in the past. We all do it because that talent makes us successful. What's best for the organization, though, is for that talent to move around. And the reason it typically doesn't is because most managers are rewarded on the performance of their organization first and foremost. They're not rewarded on developing their people or moving their people. And the companies that begin to do that, begin to recognize managers for their ability to move people, they suddenly have a much healthier organization. That mobility helps in the network conversation that we talked about earlier. And then a switch gets kind of flipped in managers. And once they get known as a manager that helps people get promoted and moved in their career, they suddenly become a talent magnet, right? Everybody wants to go work for that manager who's going to get me promoted in my career. So talent mobility is something that we see high-performing organizations do very well, but frankly, not a lot of companies are good at this. I would say maybe 20% of companies are good at talent mobility overall. So those are some highlights from the research. What I'm going to do now is turn it over to Joe and have him dive deeper into all the success that Microsoft has had over the last 5 years in changing their culture.
Thanks, Scott.
Joseph?
All right. And Kevin's going to join me back up here in a little bit to answer questions that you could have. But let me share our story with you. We don't believe that we have cracked the code on culture change. What we do want to do, though, is we share our story in hopes it may be helpful to you as you're looking at your own culture transformations. And as you can see, one of the things that we've learned time and time again is that culture change is hard. It takes a lot of resilience. Sometimes the things that you do that you think are going to be a very good idea turn out to be not so, and so then you find yourself into a bit of a recovery cycle of figuring out what to do next. But one of the things that I shared with Kevin is Good to Great is actually one of my all-time favorite books, which my team would tell you that. But the discipline in Good to Great is choosing not to do things. And we think when we look back at this 10 years from now, it was the decisions, many of them not to make a change, to keep what we have, that is going to be just as important as the changes we made in the company. So we have been on this journey, and it has been, and that's how we refer to it. We are on a culture journey, but again, for those practitioners in the room, we view culture as a mirror of what is going on inside of the organization. It is reflective of our people, how we do our work, of our products and services, of our customers. We don't actually work directly on culture. We think everything else that we do in the organization is reflected in the culture. So if you're a OD geek, we use a systems model all the time and think about where in the system we are leveraging. And I'm going to go through a couple on leadership. I'm going to talk a little bit about learning. I'm going to talk about inclusion because those are some of our big early bets. So there's Bill and Paul. These were our two founders that started up this little company, and it was a startup, and no one knew if it was going to be successful, and Bill's parents in particular. But as you've heard, we've been doing pretty well, and we don't talk too much about our valuation because in tech, 2 or 3 bad decisions can cause you to be out of business within about 3 to 5 years. It is that simple. Pharma's similar to that. So there's not a lot of durability in the tech industry. We do have 140,000 people in the Microsoft family because, as I think many of you know, LinkedIn is now part of our family. And we operate in 192 countries. And so one of the complications we have is, but how is this going to work in Paraguay? How is this going to work in Estonia? How is this going to work in China? So we're constantly thinking about regional culture as well as background experience culture, as well as what is the company culture of the places that we're operating. So I talked a little bit about innovator's dilemma, is that in tech you constantly are having to change and come up with the next thing, which also causes you to have to make some bets that can cost a tremendous amount of money that may or may not pay off, and cause you also to make big swings, but you have to be willing to take those risks, because things like digital transformation come along, and all of you in the room are saying, well, for Pete's sakes, you people are the ones that are driving digital transformation. That is kind of true on the technology side. That doesn't mean we really know how to operate our company in this new digital world, and how our employees are going to be successful in a digital world. What are the implications to talent acquisition as we start to think about the new ways that work is getting done, and where everybody is connected and communicating and talking about what you're saying on social media or privately in discussion rooms, and thinking through all of that, which is a connected all the time Internet of Things world. Even for us, it's pretty complicated, and we had to make some big bets, which quite frankly cannibalized our current monetization models in hopes that this cloud bet would pay off. And as we can see, it's working pretty well so far. We base, and why we chose to evolve for this talk in particular, we spend a lot of time thinking about these trends. What is the skills economy? What is augmented humanity? And I don't know if you heard the person who invented the term artificial intelligence, wish he hadn't called it artificial intelligence, because it's really more about augmented humanity, of how computers and robots are going to help humans and augment them versus replace. This idea of diversity and inclusion are existential, and I'll talk about inclusion here in a minute. Purpose, culture, and company stance. Company stance is being realistic about the current geopolitical issues globally and in the United States, the social issues that are going on, and having an understanding of what is our company's position on matters that our employees think we should have a stand. Because one of the things we've done is we try to take those on and have a point of view. Are you going to be a defense contractor? What is your position about increasing the diversity of your female workforce? How are we thinking about race relations in the United States and globally? Having those hard, tough conversations and coming up with a company stance has been just as important as many of the other things Kevin has been talking about. But on that first word, purpose, we feel maybe one of the most important decisions that we made was something that, quite frankly, Sachin, a few of us talked about, which is we have a company mission, but what we want our employees to do, and quite frankly, our customers and our interns to think about is, what is your personal purpose? What is your passion, is another word people would use. And how do you align that to what the company is trying to achieve so that your success is our success? And they may not always be aligned, so let's talk through that and what does that mean. But if the person feels like they are achieving their purpose every day and are passionate about the work they are doing and understand how it is helping the company be successful, you don't have to worry so much about engagement because it's there. So it's been a critical part of our plan. Fluid and flexible just has to do with how work is going to be done. For those people that went to business school or undergraduate and you read about all these teams are going to be fast forming and we're going to get all this work done. The reality is, because of many technologies not only we've developed, but others have developed, you can actually start to do that now. And you're seeing what was once just a dream and a vision coming into place. But that also means we're going to have to come to grips with something like the gig economy. And what is the culture experience of employees who may not be full-time employees or part-time full-time employees, part-time employees, but these gig workers who are going to be sitting on the same teams as your employees? So some really interesting questions, and then obviously just being change agile. Advantage and disadvantage. 40-year-old company, 3 CEOs. 3 CEOs in that amount of time, and there they are. I have actually worked with all 3 of them. Part of doing culture change is deciding and understanding you don't have to change everything. It's you only have to change the things that need to be changed and pull through what is still the legacy that is helping you move forward. So there were some things that Bill did, there were some things that Steve did, and now that Satya is doing, that is building on our 40-year legacy. And then there was just some stuff that we had to get rid of. I think I took the slide out of here, but we'll own the org chart with all the guns pointing at each other, is how Microsoft used to operate. Highly internal competitive. We operated in silos. People were withholding information, not sharing talent, and it just wasn't going to work. But you also have to have those honest conversations with your leaders about these and decide who you want to be as an organization. So first step was a new mission. Very few companies get acclaim, and we're not bragging about it, but we materially achieved our last mission, which was a PC on every desktop in every home. So we kind of got that one done. So it was time for a new one. And you'll notice, and this is one that we took a lot of time to pick every single word, include Peter, like the planet thing is really funny. And then when you work with engineers, immediately the question was, well, what about Mars? We're like, we got it, just go with the mission statement. So empower every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. What you're seeing is our job is to help other people. It's not to be the lead dog, which leads to one of my all-time favorite pieces of work we did is to say, well, what does that mean? And it starts with this growth mindset. And then the way Satya would put it quite plainly is, if you want to be in our house, if you want to be a part of our team, he refers to it sometimes as a tribe, you have to be customer obsessed. You have to be someone who believes in diversity and inclusion, and you have to be somebody who wants to work as one Microsoft. Because that's who we are going to be moving forward, and if you do that, it allows us to make a difference. So we started with this kind of a funky framework because we call them the cultural attributes. But they were developed by talking to thousands of employees, frontline employees globally, doing focus groups, asking people what's working, what's not working, what do you think we should do, not only with the behaviors inside of the company, but with our products. Because we'll also own a lot of our products were not very accessible, and we will not stand for that anymore. Whether it's gaming, whether it's productivity tools, whether it's management tools, the ability for people of all abilities to be able to use and be successful using those products and services is a key part of our culture change that doesn't have to do with performance management, doesn't have to do with hiring, it has to do with what we do for a living. Which leads to this quote. If you want to be cool, go elsewhere. But if you want to join a company that is committed to making others cool, join Microsoft. We want people to be part of our group who are committed to empowering people, and we're really dead serious about it, and empowering organizations and how that can happen. And this is where he'll go as far as to say, we may not be the company for you. But part of that has been coming to grips with who is it we want to be moving forward, and then basing it on some hard science. We had a big meeting of the people who work in my organization globally yesterday, and we were talking about a practice point of view. What is our practice point of view on this particular topic? And we were debating a number of them. One of our practice points of view is the following, is we double down on neuroscience. And we spend a lot of time talking with neuroscientists from the United States, Europe, and frankly in Asia, about how do we help people understand why they think the way they think and behave the way they do. And we're basing all of our behavioral models on this. So whether it's screening in or screening out, which our GTA partners are doing a fabulous job of, whether it's talking about unconscious bias, and you've all heard this, I'm not going to be the first person to say it, humans are naturally biased because that is the way your brain is wired. The adult learning is to understand why you have that bias, and then what is your thought about that, your judgment about that, and then your action about that. But having just some factual scientific conversations with people about topics that can be pretty touchy has really helped us drive forward in a very quick manner. All right, let me run through these pretty quickly. So then, for those of you playing along at home, you're like, well, where do you start with all this? So we started with, let's define a mission, let's give some endpoint of who do we want to be, how do we want to interact with each other. And then the first step, which surprised people, is rather than going after management and managers, because they are your big change lever, we started with leadership. Along the way, we did a lot with learning, and quite frankly, we can talk at length about LinkedIn Learning, which has been a key plank in all of this, and then fundamentally the concept of inclusion. And what does inclusion really mean and how do you practice it? But first of all, on leadership, we defined what are the most important things for leaders to do at Microsoft, not everything they need to do. I don't know about you, I get these competency models and they lay them out in front of you and there's like 12 of them and then there's 36 bullets. And I look at that and I'm like, I suck at about half of those things, so I don't think I'm ever gonna be a very effective leader. And we're like, let's just get rid of all of that and say, the 3 things Microsoft leaders need to do to drive the company forward: create clarity, generate energy, deliver success. You will see then, we said, so how does that get implemented as part of the change? And a big decision point, a debate with Satya and his directs, is this concept that we believe at Microsoft, and this is new, that every person has the potential to be a leader, but being a leader does not mean you're a manager or an executive. A university hire trying to get a sale done has to put together a virtual team of people to make that happen. That's leadership. A person in talent acquisition trying to do a big event at a university has to pull together a virtual team. That's leadership. We want everybody to be a leader, and we believe everyone has potential. And then we did things like redesigned our entire people review process, which we now call talent talks, because we want it to be a dialogue versus a math camp test, which we really, frankly, really like to do. We talk about talent using spreadsheets. It's really dehumanizing. But we've gotten away from that and now talking about the humans. And now the role of manager, which we rolled out 2 weeks ago. And the role of manager at Microsoft, you'll see our pattern. It's not everything managers need to do. It's 3 things. Managers at Microsoft need to model, coach, and care. You'll be hearing a lot more from us about this because it also relates to the neuroscience around the rule of 3. But globally, for the first time in the company's history, we have a single definition of what are the expectations of managers. What we're doing next is, now that we have that, for the first time, I was sitting next to some colleagues at P&G today having a conversation at lunch, and I said, for the first time in the company's almost 40-year history, we have required manager training. 38 hours that the managers have to take using, for example, a single coaching model that's a MOOC, a single role expectation, a single set of how do you have difficult conversations, because what we're looking for is consistency across those 140,000 people's lived experience in the company with their manager. So on learning, just briefly, you'll see LinkedIn Learning in the middle. We turned LinkedIn Learning on. So I used to do M&A, if you didn't read my bio. So I did mergers and acquisitions for 10 years in finance and then came over to do this job when Satya took over as CEO. And we happened to have acquired LinkedIn as my last deal and then went over to do this thing. But I said, hey, since I know this is coming, I get a head start on everybody else. Let's go ahead and get LinkedIn Learning turned on inside of the company. In the first 90 days we turned on LinkedIn Learning, you want to hear a demand signal? 1 million hours of video training was watched in 90 days. And Microsoft people are really busy, so I was like, when are they doing all this? But the demand signal was there was such a pent-up demand to learn and grow that this had to happen. And then you'll see some of the other platforms we have, and then these things around hackathons where people come together to take a problem. It doesn't have to be in your day job. Some of the accessibility changes in our tools came out of hackathons. And it's been the controller that you maybe have seen movies on for people who have some form of disability with their arms. That was a hackathon project, not an engineering team project. It's now a commercial product. On inclusion, we think about it around awareness, curiosity, and courage, but here's what it comes down to is that my personal journey, and I think many people in the company's personal journey, is you are going to get this wrong occasionally. And other people are going to get inclusion wrong occasionally. What we've approached that is you have to give people grace to try again. And how do you have a conversation when it isn't quite right? You've used the wrong pronoun. You had some kind of microaggression with somebody where they feel slighted. And rather than it turning into a thing, how do you have employees talk with each other or maybe get with their manager so that people feel included? Because we feel fundamentally we can hire all the people in the world, but if they don't feel that this is a company that they want to be at and we want them to be there, they won't stay. And this is inclusion of all types. It's been a major play for us, and we're continuing to invest there. So valuing differences, looking beyond ourselves, and then we also think there is an economic opportunity when you look at underserved populations, when you think of underdeveloped countries, about the importance of diversity and inclusion globally. So those are our 3 big initial bets. Starting next Tuesday, we are rolling out, and this is an example of renovation. I would not have done it this way. There's different ways to do values. There's like inspirational values, there's aspirational values, there's values that operate like guiding principles that allow you to make decisions and take action. We had a set of values, and so we were doing a bit of a remodel with them, and we ended up with a set of values that are what I refer to as pay to play, or you have to perform to play, which is these are the baseline expectations: respect, accountability, and integrity for all employees. And in the next 90 days, and the first time in the company's history, all 140,000 employees spread across all those countries are going to have a 3 to 4 hour conversation about the values, led by managers, not led by trainers or HR. So if you know of any of the NLI models around scarfed, there's a lot of scarfed people in the company right now because these managers are like, I haven't led anything like this in my life, so we're getting them ready. But we think it is the next fundamental step in our culture journey to start talking about how we're going to interact with each other. So with that, let me bring Kevin back up, and we'll open ourselves to any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe.
If there are any. Yep, way back there.
Siobhan has a microphone.
I work for an organization that's been around for a long time, and we have some managers that, have always worked in the same department or business unit. And when it comes to talent mobility, they don't really understand why some of our folks would maybe want to move around to different business units or divisions. And what I'm wondering is, what advice or first step can you give to us to tell us how we change their mindset from, okay, if this person doesn't want to work in this department or this business unit, we don't want them anymore, to something more positive?
Want to talk about
Yeah.
teams? No.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, use the data. The data says very clearly that it's good for an organization to do that. I would look at it as a way to not only grow that individual, but also benefit whatever department or unit that individual is going into. Typically, the cross-pollination of information and communication can really help innovation, creativity, and execution inside an organization. And if you're having trouble getting talent mobility going, one easy thing to do is do a one-for-one swap where 2 people coach each other in the job they used to have for the first year or so. That's a really easy way to just get started.
I think that's the right answer. That if you can land with business leaders, and there's great statistics out there you can use, that diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams over time. And one of the best ways to make a team more diverse is continue to bring in fresh talent. And then like a bunch of my talent acquisition colleagues are here, and injecting university hires into these teams, because you will find the idea generation is so much stronger. And as a word of caution, if you've missed the memo, it isn't just the millennials, the Zs have now arrived. And they are different than the millennials. And so it's kind of an exciting time, and we're gonna have to just sort through all of this. But continuing to add talent into teams and move talent around is key. There's one, yeah, there.
Hi there. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about ONA. I don't know much about it.
Yeah, so ONA stands for Organizational Network Analysis, and you can do this a couple different ways. The easiest way is to just survey the workforce. You're basically asking the workforce, who do you turn to the most when you need help, have questions, need guidance? And through that analysis, then you can really kind of hone in on who are the go-to people and who are not the go-to people. The other way to do it is to examine normal communication channels, email, Teams, other collaboration tools. And I find that to be a little invasive sometimes, but you can do that as an organization as well to see who people are going to. I know we had a question over here.
Yes. Thank you guys both for this talk. Is really informative. I just had a question about Microsoft. It looks like you spend a lot of time training leaders on the change of culture and how to transform, which I like because they are the ones who need to be championing it. But what other tools did you guys use for employees just to get the word out? Like, this is us. This is what we're doing.
Great. So when you're going to do this, you have to pick your change management strategy. When we do anything related to, writ large culture and employees, we try to go everywhere all at once as fast as we possibly can. When we rolled out the leadership principles, we did it absolutely top-down cascade because we wanted the leader to be able to understand what the leadership model was before it got to the next level. And our team says, hey, you're not generating energy for me. And he's like, what are you talking about? So we made sure that they all had that. You pick your multi-channel approach and your systemic change approach, depending on what you're trying to do. And with employees, what you might find is there is pent-up demand for change and new in your organization. And if you can tap into that by simply asking employees what they want, you can really generate a whole bunch of change agents for you all over the organization. I think we have time for one more, maybe, and then we can.
All right, what tips do you have for assessing culture fit in your external hires?
So, I should have these guys answer that. So we're not using a formal assessment to do that yet, but through, we do believe that, an interview is a great way to get to know people and not to also overdo it. But first of all, we are doing a much better job of explaining what we mean by culture. Or if you're interviewing someone who's going to be in a management or leadership role, what we believe about leadership, and see if that resonates with them. But you can imagine with 190 countries worth of people and 140,000 of them, we have lots of different types of folks. And we don't even really think about fit anymore as much as just can they thrive and have a lived experience with us that is beneficial to them and us.
One thing I'll say on culture fit, it's become a dirty phrase, right? It's almost synonymous with homogeneity and not being diverse if you're hiring for culture fit. I never believed that. There's a great article in the past week in HBR that talks about this, and you can still have culture fit and you can have diversity and innovation and other good things that go along with it. Yeah. Siobhan, should we? Okay,
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Joe and I will
everybody.
hang out, but thank you for your attention.